everyone. We're going to give a few minutes for folks to be able to ask questions. Or begin to start. All right. Looks like we have a few, and I want to honor time. So hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Smith. I am the co-director of social sustainability here at Key Culture. I am a white woman. I am broadcasting from a corner of our kitchen. I have blonde curly hair. I'm wearing a white and black horizontal striped sweater, and I have glasses. Thank you so much for joining us. The key focus of today will be me going over a little bit of our social sustainability key book, but then also talking about accessibility in museums and cultural heritage sites. So you might be asking yourself, what is social sustainability? Well, social sustainability is highlighted in the UN Sustainability Development Goals. It's a practice that fights for equity and for everyone's voice to be heard. It requires us to actively seek out and listen to multiple perspectives, particularly those who are unrepresented or marginalized. Social sustainability advocates for there to be an inclusive society where everyone has a good quality of life and individuals can maximize their potential without jeopardizing such opportunities for future generations. So that's social sustainability, and that comes directly from, if you couldn't tell I was reading it, directly from the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which you may sometimes hear as UN's SDGs. So we are going to talk primarily about accessibility in this. I am based just outside of DC in the United States. So when I talk about disability, I use person first language. What that means is when I talk about it, I talk about a person with disabilities. So a person who is blind, a person who is deaf, a person who has autism. That is the language that I use. Language when it comes to disability varies from country to country, city to city. But also, it's just like pronouns. So if you meet someone that has a disability, always ask how they want their disability be talked about. So just as a tip. So let's jump right into just a little recap of our social sustainability key book. It covers 5 sections, other than the intro. The first section is creating a museum for everybody. That goes into some anti-bias work, that goes into accessibility, that goes into just making sure that we are creating equitable experiences for folks that want to come to our museums and are able then to come to our museums. The second is people making change. What that means is making change from the bottom up or the top down or from the middle to the bottom to the top. And we also cover some equitable and inclusive hiring practices within that section. Then we move on to decolonization and recontextualizing museums and their collections. And then we go into people on the planet, how to use the UN's SDGs, Sustainability Development Goals, and how your museum can use them. And then the next is you are part of the change. So what you can do, what are action items that you can do tomorrow after you read our key book to be able to go in and use these action items to change your museum for good. So there is a link on our Key Culture page that you're currently watching this from to go to our website. There's a portion on key books. We have one on waste and materials. We have our social sustainability one that I hope you download. And then we also have one on energy. And all 3 of those are free. The only thing that we ask from you is to give us your email so we could maybe send you some questions for feedback so we know we're on the right track with the key books that we've created. So right now, then, that's the little overview. I'm going to jump in now to accessibility in museums. Just so you know my background, for the last 14 years, I have either worked in museums, worked in a theater, or worked with museums, especially when I was in the theater as a consultant. I do have a love for sustainability. That was my first love in museums, outside of museums. And then I transitioned into making sure that museums and cultural art spaces are equitable for folks that have disabilities. So that's a little bit of my background. I am going to move in because this is now, we're 5 minutes in, or 6 minutes in, and we have a half hour. So we have some pre-questions. And I'm going to jump right into them. If you're watching this and you have questions on how to make your museum more accessible to people with disabilities, please put them in the comments and I would love to answer them. But we already have some questions that have come in preparation for this Q&A. So I'm just going to jump right in. The first question that we got was, how can I make my museum's virtual programs accessible? I'm sure there's not a single museum that is not doing virtual programs in the time of the COVID pandemic. I hope that there's still a lift of a good amount of virtual programs after we all open, but a way that anyone can make sure that their virtual programs are accessible is, the biggest thing is to be able to provide captions or hire a cart writer. Cart writers in the US, I know that this is global. I believe it's the same globally, but cart writers are the people that we would hire to do captions. And that's a live person doing captions. Right now, this video has automated captions. With Zoom, you can do automated captions. With Facebook Live, you could do automated captions. But when it comes to current AI, AI is only 80% accurate. So what that means is, out of 10 words, 8 words are going to be correct, and there's a big likelihood that 2 words out of a 10-word sentence or phrase are going to be incorrect. So what does that mean? That's not equitable access to your programs. And if you're putting on a program, if you want to tell people about it, the information that you're trying to share is important, so you should want to make sure everyone has access to that information. So it would be A, to have captions. B, let's say someone doesn't use captions. Let's say someone is deaf or hard of hearing and they prefer to use a sign language interpreter. To be able to hire a sign language interpreter. I don't know that many museums that have provided sign language interpretation in their webinars or live content that's online. But maybe you're not being asked because no one knows that you can offer that for your programs. When you plan for your programs, do you have, when someone registers for it, a blurb about, do you need any accommodations? How can we help you? Do you need captions? Do you need American Sign Language? To let your organization, your museum know before you start that program, so you can have time to get those people that are going to be contractors to be able to do that work for you. And one more thing that's probably the hardest, because it's not hiring somebody that has a specialty in this, it's you doing it if you're leading the program, but to do verbal descriptions. Like when I started this, I described myself. I'm a white woman, I have blonde hair that's curly, I'm wearing XYZ. You know, to be able to do that, let's say I was presenting a PowerPoint presentation and there were images on this PowerPoint presentation, I would say what that image was. Or if there were text, we've all been to probably a lecture before, for academic purpose or just for fun purposes, where the presenter references the slides, but they don't say everything that's on the slide. Well, if I can't see, I missed a huge point because you're assuming that I am able to read what you're saying or what you've written, which is usually not the case. So it's definitely a skill and it's definitely something you have to remind yourself of. But I really feel that that's important and a way to kind of level up. Like, let's say you're already doing live person captions. Let's say you're already doing ASL, or I'm sorry, I said ASL because I'm in America, American Sign Language. But let's say you're already offering sign language interpretation for your online programs. I've seen a lot of programs that have those two offerings. I have not seen that many programs that offer image description where someone is either saying out loud, or I know that if you use Zoom and do the translate, like maybe you have visitors that speak more than one language. So you have the translate on Zoom where you're presenting in English, but let's say you have a huge French following. So you're having someone translate it in French. Via that same portal, you can have somebody do image description. So maybe it's not you, maybe it's a whole, like, maybe you're a theater and you're doing an entire performance online and you want to make sure you're doing image or audio description for that, then that would be a reason to maybe use that feature if you're using Zoom. I'm very comfortable using Zoom and I know how to do that. When it comes to other streaming services, I'm confident there's a way, but I can't really speak to that. But yeah, so captions, making sure that if someone needs a sign language interpreter, you can provide that, and image description. That would be amazing. But how you know that people need that is to build that into A, your budget, that you'll be able to provide for that, and B, make sure that you're asking when people sign up for it to shout loud and big that you can provide accommodations, and to have a way for them to reach out to you, or make that part of the registration where you can create a custom question that asks if they need sign language, that asks if someone needs captioning, that asks if someone needs image description. The second question I have is, before the COVID pandemic, my museum had some accessibility features in our exhibits, but we have not seen an increase in visitors with disabilities. How can we change that? That's a great question. So I'm going to say that that's probably something a lot of museums do. They are like, we should build something accessible, and they build it, and then no one comes to it. And the reason why is because it's not a if we build it, they will come scenario. It's a we have excluded a large portion of this community for probably the entire existence our institution has been in existence. They don't come to us, they don't seek us out, they don't follow us on social media. People with disabilities don't come to our museum because we've never offered anything before. Well, if they're not paying attention to you and they don't have a relationship with you, how are they supposed to know? How are you supposed to get the word out to a new community that you finally have offerings for them and they are welcome in your space? What I would suggest is reaching out to disability organizations in the city or town you are in to say, hey, we're offering this now. Do you have a newsletter that goes out? Do you have, after COVID is over, question mark, or after we are safely vaccinated and can be in person, do you have in-person meetings? I could come talk to the people that are served by your organization. Do you have a newsletter? Is there a way, if you have a relationship with local media, like your local news channel or your local paper? That is definitely something that everyone pays attention to, because everyone pays attention to news. Maybe you can reach out and say, hey, would we be able to get you to do a little story on us to focus on our accessibility features? So that's how I would go, like accessible marketing. But also on the same venture, if someone has never participated in anything your museum does and has a disability, and you have new things and exhibits, well, you have to make sure that the way they'll be able to find times, locations, all of that kind of things for your institution is also accessible. So you have to make sure that your website is accessible. You also have to make sure that your social media is accessible. What does that mean? It means that any image has an alt text on it, which is alternative text. Alt text is HTML code that you or I that does not have low vision or is blind, that would, if someone's using a screen reader on their computer or on their phone, it will be able to, if you have alt text, be able to pop up and say, this is what that image is. You have to make sure that there's enough color contrast on your social media images or on your website, so the colors are not too closely together. You have to make sure that if you have a video, there's captions, and it actually says you're not relying on auto captions. You are relying on someone going in and either checking auto captions that have already been generated, or someone going in and writing captions. In my experience in accessibility marketing, people right now go to social media before they go to a website, because people are already on social media, so they just have to type in the name on that platform to see information about that institution. So while your website might be accessible, your social media might not be accessible. So you have to remove any communication barriers that your institution may have, so people can equitably access any information, so they can easily get to your institution, so then they can experience great accessibility offerings in your exhibits. But kudos on making your exhibits accessible. That's a feat in itself. The next question I have is, what is the best way to interact with visitors with disabilities in person once my museum opens to the public? That's a great question. I don't know if this person, like what department this person is in, but I'm going to refer it to be a frontline staff answer, because our frontline staff, the backbone of our institutions, are who greets our visitors first. So if you are a frontline staff and someone comes in, like let's say someone comes in and is using a wheelchair, chances are they don't need anything from you with the exception of, hey, do you have a restroom that has bars in it, like an accessible restroom? Other than that, they know how to use their wheelchair. Or if your museum is multi-level, like, hey, can you point me in the direction of where your elevators are so I can get to the second floor, I can get to the basement? That's really easy. A big no-no is, unless someone asks you for assistance, if they're using a mobility device, whether it be a wheelchair or a cane or something of that nature, that is a tool that they are using, but that is an extension of them. You do not touch that without someone expressly asking, like, can you help me do this? Like, can you help me? Can you push my wheelchair to do X, Y, and Z to the elevator or something like that? Don't touch someone. That would be like you touching a stranger's shoulder. So that's a thing to not do. But yeah, make sure you know where the elevators are and you can easily tell them where they are, and where accessible bathrooms are, and where you can easily tell them where accessible bathrooms are. When it comes to visitors who are blind or have low vision, a really easy thing would be to, it's going to change person to person because everyone doesn't have the same foot size or everyone doesn't have the same stride. But do you know approximately how many steps from the front door to your exhibits you have to go to get to an exhibit they're looking at? Do you know approximately how many stairs to the bathroom? And, you know, is it a straight shot? Is it to the left? Is it to the right? Is it to the left and then to the right and then to the left? Can you directionally tell them from memory where things are in the museum so they can get to them? Something I've witnessed is people saying, oh, if you go this way. Well, if you don't tell them to the right, straight, or left, they can't see what you're saying when you say go this way. So that's a way. When it comes to someone who has blind or low vision, they may ask you for help in getting somewhere. How you will be able to, the best way rather, to be able to lead someone that is blind or has low vision is to ask, how they would like that to. But a standard that I found when I have worked with the low vision and blind community is for you to just stand there, and then someone will put their like arm, they'll like grab your arm by your elbow, and you'll just guide them. But when you are guiding them somewhere, you have to make sure, like, we're going straight, we're going to turn to the left here, we're going to turn to the right here, we're going to stop in a few steps, or we're going to take a stairs, this is where the stairs start, we're going to go up the stairs or we're going to go down the stairs, just so someone doesn't fall into someone else because you're not telling someone what you're doing with them. And when it comes to the deaf or hard of hearing community, I doubt that everyone in your visitor experience knows sign language. Also, every person who is hard of hearing or is deaf does not know sign language. How can you equitably communicate with them? Always have a pen or a pencil and a pad of paper. So when they come in and ask questions, they can write down questions. If they don't vocalize, they can write down questions. Or if they do vocalize, they can ask you a question and then you can just write down the answer. But that's a way to communicate with the deaf and hard of hearing community. Most of the people that come into your museums, while disability is something that people can age into, while it is something that people can have an accident and come into, a lot of people have had disabilities their entire life, so they know how to interact with the world around them. They won't need your help unless they particularly asked for it. So we're going to move on to the next question I have, which is a big question. How can I get buy-in for accessibility in my museum? Well, that's the million-dollar question of how you can get buy-in. My question would be to you, firstly, is have you interacted with the disability community in the city or town you live in? Have you asked them what they would like to see? Like, if you are an able person, have you talked to anybody? Like, are you just making things accessible because you think you know how to make them accessible and you think you know what the community wants? Or have you talked to the community? My first step instruction would be talk to the disability community in your town or city and ask what they would like to see from your museum. After that, like, go back to your museum and see A, what you can do potentially for free or low cost, and then B, which of those options would take money. Like, if you have staff that's trained, or like you could train a whole bunch of staff on how to do verbal audio description, then you have staff that can lead a tour, or if someone pops in and is blind or has low vision, they can come in, and then your staff that you're already paying can help them experience the museum if that's what that person would like, if that's what that visitor would like. Or if someone is on your staff knows sign language, there's that. But if someone's not certified in sign language, let's say that you have a large deaf population in your community and they ask to make sure that for programs it's really easy for them to request an American Sign Language interpreter. You can go back and say, hey, can we plan to have a program every month with sign language interpretation? And also, can we maybe reform and relook at the way that we have people request for sign language interpretation? One of the museums I used to work at, and I'm sure that this is very common, it was a struggle to find out how and who you were supposed to contact to get a sign language interpretation. On the back of like our quarterly calendars, it was like in the smallest print available, and it said 4 weeks to call us, like, between the program and when you wanted to come. I, as someone that isn't hard of hearing or is deaf, or I mean, I use glasses, but I don't have low vision and I'm not blind. I don't have any mobility disabilities. I can go to a museum, if we were in a pandemic, this afternoon or tomorrow. I don't have to call ahead. I don't have to call ahead a month in advance to ask to be able to participate. So what we were able to do is we were able to shrink that time to be 2 weeks, but also give the language to always contact us, even if it's not 2 weeks out, So we could probably still be able to help you. And then it was, we should really eliminate the barrier of someone reaching out to us for American Sign Language interpretation. So what we did is we decided every month, not quarter, but every month, we would have one program in our calendar so everyone could see it. It was denoted on our website, and we also told deaf and hard of hearing organizations in our city that this is the programs we're offering for the next 3 months that have sign language interpretation. They're free, or this one costs and this is how much it is. Please come. We would love to see you. And they didn't have to call us ahead. They have the choice. That is equitable choice. They were able to be like, oh yeah, that thing is happening at that museum tonight. We should go to it because there's a sign language interpreter. We don't have to call ahead or anything. So it's really about making sure that there's choice. I digress. So with that program, I was able to go to the higher ups in my museum and say, hey, this would be equitable access. I went out to sign language interpretation places in my city to be able to bid out what a year of American Sign Language would look like at our museum. And it was a pretty big number for something that we had never done anything for. But I said, this is more equitable. Could we pilot this for a year? We could potentially even get this sponsored as well by someone that wants to fund accessibility. We didn't find a specific funder, but we were able to use some funds and move it to be able to have the programs with sign language interpreters. And our deaf and hard of hearing audience grew and grew and grew. And you know what? Like, after those 12 months, it wasn't a pilot program anymore. Even after the first 3 months, it wouldn't have been a pilot program anymore because it was, people were using the services that we were given. So yeah, that's what I would say. Just, you have to talk to the community. You have to find out what your community wants via accessibility. You have to go to the higher ups with a plan already written out, with costs, with people hours, with all of those things in it, and say, this is the people hours it will take, this is the money it will cost to hire someone outside for these services. But I think it's doable. Maybe don't say, like, maybe plan it out for a month or 3 months and say, I would really love to do this as a pilot program. Can we see if we can try to get this going? And if you go back to what I mentioned earlier, which is making sure your marketing efforts are accessible and making sure you're getting the word out to places outside of the walls of your museum, people will probably show up. People will maybe show up for the first time ever to your museum because you haven't offered them anything before, and now you are. And that's super exciting, because if we are not making sure that everyone can come to our museums, then why are we working in museums? Why do we have our museums? They should be an equitable and enjoyable experience for everybody. So this is a half hour. We have 2 minutes. I'm done with the questions that I had. Does anyone that's watching today have any questions? If not, I can definitely fill those 2 minutes. Well, I'm going to fill those 2 minutes. Some of the questions that we have asked ourselves when we were talking about social sustainability is, what is one, like, if we had a magic wish, one thing that we would be able to change in museums via social sustainability? And I'm actually going to narrow that down to accessibility. And I'm actually going to narrow it down to not public efforts. I'm going to narrow it down to internal efforts. People like to see people that look like them that work at museums. Do you have any people in your museums that have disabilities, that are employees? And if you don't, why don't you? People with disabilities have the same skills as you or I. Is your museum accessible to folks internally? You know, if there's a staff meeting in a room and it's on a different floor, you may have public-facing elevators, but do you have employee elevators to get to only employee parts? What does your onboarding look like? What is your day-to-day? can you make it so it's an equitable experience to people who are blind or have low vision, or people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or people that have mobility disabilities or any other type of disabilities? And before I let you go, one more thing about the museum field, because we're all museum professionals. When you go to conferences to make this equitable and to get more people with disabilities into our field, make sure that when you present anything that you're doing the same things I mentioned earlier about making your museum's program accessible to making your personal conference or presentation or meeting presentations accessible. Like, are you speaking everything that's written on a page? Are you verbalizing what your images are? Are you making sure there's enough color contrast and there's not 20 different lines of text on a page? I went to a conference a few years ago where the background was white and the lettering was yellow. So like even me with my glasses in the first row had a hard time reading it, because who chooses yellow and white for a presentation? I digress. But yeah, that would be pretty much the 1 and 1.5 things, is to go internally to help museums be more diverse, more equitable, get more voices to the table. Make sure that people with disabilities can work in your museums, because people with disabilities that are museum professionals are out there. There should be no barriers for people to work at your institution. So that's what I got. That is my time. I'm a minute over. If you came today, thank you so much. I love talking about accessibility, and I'm really excited about this. If you want to reach out to myself or someone on our sustainability team, especially after you download the social sustainability keybook, you might have questions. We have an email that we manage, and it is socialsustainability@keycultural.org. So that is SOCIALSUSTAINBILITY at KICLUTURE.org. So social sustainability at Key Culture. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you engage with our key books. Thank you. Have a good day.